A round of applause to Vico team from Viwandani. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Global Landscapes Forum 2025 under the theme Innovate, Restore, Prosper. My name is Kipto Chemoiwa, and I am an environmental scientist working here at C4eCraft, and I'll be your host today. Just a guy with a mic and a lot of love for land restoration and for all of you. And of course, I love streams. Have you ever imagined what Africa would look like? You know, a home to 60% of world's global solar energy potential, actually powered its own potential. You know, we have the sun, we have the soil, we have the seeds. We also have, you know, the youngest workforce. And also we have vast minerals in the planet. And more so, we have, you know, the most the majority of the arable land across the earth. And just to add also the cherry to the cake, we have, you know, the innovation that we need to power ourselves. In this very last GLF Africa 2024, we learned that sustainable change is not imported, but it is homegrown. And today we're here to build on that and explore together how Africa can actually power its own economy. You know, we have great innovation, as I mentioned earlier, you know, from banana leaves turned into sanitary pads, to clean cooking innovations that just won an award recently, and other amazing innovations. You know, we're not waiting to be saved. You know, we're taking initiative, we're inventing, we're restoring, and we're building. And just to mention, you know, you are in the Africa's most innovative city here in Nairobi, and I hope that is a statistic that is still there. So before we delve into today's exciting conversations, you know, a few housekeeping notes. You know, the session will run until 6:30 p.m. Thereafter, it will be followed by a reception to about 8:30. And throughout the day, you will have the opportunity to join panel discussions, plenaries in this hall, as well as activities in the action corner led by our community and action teams. Paper copies of the agenda are available at the registration and info desks. You can see them outside, and you can access the digital copy by scanning the QR code that is on our badges. And of course, if you're joining us virtually, we're so happy to have you, and you can access also the agenda online. Simultaneous AI translation is available in English, also in French and Kiswahili. You can follow the translations as well through the screens on either side of the room, but if there's an additional language that you wish to follow the session in, please scan the QR code as well. There's another QR code for translations. Lunch will be served between 12 p.m. and 1:30, and you can find the tents by heading down the main road, and also you have the map also on our badges. Don't forget as well to stop by the vision wall just outside this conference hall to contribute your ideas for transforming Africa's landscapes and also building Africa's natural economy and helping shape our future rooted in restoration, innovation, and prosperity. So before we dive into today's rich sessions, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the very many hands and hearts behind this event. We say in Africa that it takes a village to raise a child. A special thank you to GLF's 35 charter member organizations who are part of this work in many important ways. We're also excited to extend our gratitude to the GLF's donors, partners, and sponsors for contributing to GLF 2025, the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Climate Action, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety, the International Climate Initiative, the Luxembourg government, the Food Systems, Land Use and Restoration Impact Program, the Global Environment Facility, International Model Forest Network, that is IMFN, the Government of Canada, and Robert Bosch Foundation. So to all our amazing partners, through your continued support and collaboration, this event can take root and be a space where ideas grow, connections are forged. I hope we'll all connect today, and new possibilities emerge. And we are equally excited, as I mentioned earlier, to welcome our digital audience joining us from all over the world. 8 million have been reached so far on social media. A round of applause for that. 8 million. With almost 600,000 engagements. So thank you for being part of this global community. Now, to officially commence our day, let's hear from our CEO here at C4 Aircraft and the Director General of Aircraft, Dr. Eliane Yubalijoro. Please help me in welcoming Eliane to the stage.
Thank you, Kipto. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us virtually and in person here on our beautiful C4 Aircraft campus in Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome to GLF Africa 2025. Karibuni, bienvenue. This is our 7th edition of GLF Africa. With each one, our collective energy grows and our actions expand, and we see more transformative ideas taking root. As of this morning, this edition has already reached 9 million people. This week, we're very fortunate to welcome to the GLF Africa Community and Action Assembly to our campus. These youth and community changemakers from across Africa are here to connect, learn, and lead the transformation of their landscapes. GLF Africa last year focused on scaling locally led landscape innovations and solutions to build a greener Africa. And this year we ask, how can nature power Africa's present and future? The timing could not be more critical. This beautiful continent, which so many of us are lucky to call home, is under pressure from climate change, landscape degradation, and biodiversity loss, putting millions of livelihoods and ecosystems in jeopardy. Nature is declining, land is struggling to protect and support a growing population, and land rights remain insecure. And at the same time, new challenges have emerged. There's a shift in global development cooperation and multilateralism, which impacts policy, the funding landscape, and more. And these challenges demand action. We must confront the future today. Africa's population is expected to increase from 1.5 billion to 2.5 billion by 2050. And this will increase demands for food, shelter, and jobs. This population growth also means the continent will continue to be full of young people who dream of leading, fulfilling lives. Before us is the opportunity to reimagine a future where Africa stewards its landscapes and shapes its own path. guided by science and traditional knowledge and paired with good governance, meaningful partnerships, and ethical AI and technology. And we are not starting from zero. We are blessed with natural capital, from vast arable landscapes and soils and teeming biodiversity to forest and water resources. We have a wealth of indigenous knowledge and inspiring youthful population. With this, we can define and build a nature economy that is nature positive, socially equitable, inclusive, and economically competitive. But to get there, we must invest the right resources in the right places. We must forge new relationships with partners at all levels, from the local community level to governments and private sector. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of the narrative of a fragile continent without opportunities. Those who live here, those who are from here, and understand that Africa is rife with opportunities worth investing in. And when we invest meaningfully in our nature, we create opportunities to enhance food sovereignty, to improve climate resilience, and for meaningful, secure livelihoods. And we do this while safeguarding the aspirations of generations to come. So in the sessions today, we'll hear about what transitioning to an inclusive green economy looks like. We'll hear about the potential of the growing youth population, about the green jobs, and the local businesses that serve as engines for sustainable socioeconomic development, without reproducing old extractive models. We'll learn about sustainable value chains that support rather than exploit people and nature. And we'll also hear about agriculture, which, while central for socioeconomic prosperity, remains a leading cause of land degradation. We cannot achieve what we want in silos. We must unify around sustainable pathways for Africa to navigate its way into prosperity. It is time for Africa to rise up to the challenge and steward its development. We have the resources, we have the will, and we can build healthy ecosystems, resilient and prosperous livelihoods, and competitive and sustainable economies. It is time to innovate, restore, and prosper. Once again, thank you so much for joining us at GLF Africa. And I wish you an engaging conference as we shape the future of this continent. Merci, asante sana, thank you.
Thank you, Eliane. As she nicely put it, it's time for us as a continent to rise up to the challenge and also steward our own development. And also, as she mentioned, this GLF this year is very special as it is taking place within the Community and Action Assembly that has brought together over 80 local chapters and community leaders and stewards, changemakers who have been on our campus here since Monday to learn, share experiences, co-create knowledge about the future of Africa's landscape. So please give them a round of applause. And maybe you can raise your hands if you're part of this amazing team in the room. Come on, the 80, thank you so much for making the time. And now that we are officially open, thank you so much, Eliane. Now let's begin our journey with one of the central moments of the day, the opening plenary. And this plenary is around powering Africa's future, the promise of nature-centered economies. So ladies, gentlemen, friends, join me in giving a warm welcome to the stage, our moderator for this plenary, a great friend of mine, Dorothy Maseke, who leads FSD Africa's work on natural capital and biodiversity finance, and also heads the African Natural Capital Alliance Secretariat. Karibu sana, Dorothy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists, guests, it's such a pleasure to be here this morning, should I say afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. And I have the pleasure of opening a session that is about bold reimagination. And I think what we need to ask ourselves today is, what if development in Africa was no longer about extracting, as we were just told this morning? What if it was no longer about extracting from nature, but regenerating it? What if our forests, our grasslands, our mangroves, and traditional knowledge weren't seen as relics, weren't seen as only beautiful things to look at, but as drivers of innovation, drivers of resilience, and drivers of prosperity. And so we are here today to spotlight a new paradigm where restoration and regenerative value chains, green innovation, green power are not only ecologically sound, but economically just and socially inclusive. And so we are going to look at a couple of critical questions. And let me put them in three buckets. The first one is, what does it take to be truly African-led, truly nature-centered? What do nature-centered economic models look like? The second aspect would be, what are the policy shifts that are needed? What is required in governance? What is required in finance to make that work? And the third one is, how do we make this truly centered on women, centered on the youth, centered on indigenous knowledge and indigenous people? How do we make this truly centered in shaping this future? And so I have the pleasure of introducing our first keynote address. And this is Paul Garekochia, the Director for Sustainable Supply Chains, Agriculture, Food Systems from the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, who will be joining virtually through a pre-recorded session. So we have that on the screen, and I will take my seat as we watch that. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished participants in Nairobi, very nice to meet you again, and thank you for the... Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished participants in Nairobi, very nice to meet you again, and thank you for the invitation to speak here at this GLF Africa 2025 opening plenary. It's really a pleasure for me to be part of the GLF again. Just 2 months ago, I had the opportunity to participate in the GLF forests in Person and Bonn in Germany. Yeah, and I'm again in Bonn, waiting for you to come, but you all gathered in Nairobi. But this is fine with me. So have fun in Nairobi and have wonderful discussions. I'm pleased to see the discussions on forest and landscape restoration continue in Nairobi, exploring how to leverage the use of AI while involving local communities and traditional knowledge, as well as mobilizing the necessary finance and investments for Africa. All these building blocks are crucial for a nature-based economy at scale, where Africa can capitalize on its unique and immense natural wealth, cultural heritage, and young dynamic population. Africa's youth, with over 400 million people aged between 14 and 35, are key to shaping its future landscapes and economies. Their fresh ideas and commitment are vital for fair and lasting solutions. Africa is also home to some of the planet's most vital natural ecosystems. However, the continent is severely affected by climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation, with over 45% of the world's degraded land located in Africa. These intertwined crises are threatening ecosystems, livelihoods, and economies, intensifying poverty and food insecurity. Africa's rich ecosystems, forests, savannas, wetlands, must be recognized not as passive resources, but as core foundations for economic resilience, climate adaptation, and food security. Integrated landscape approaches help countries balance conservation, livelihoods, and production across entire regions. They align agriculture, energy, rural and urban development with ecological health. This requires integrating nature into planning, national planning, securing land rights, and scaling nature-based solutions. To achieve scale, mobilizing investments is crucial through carbon markets, for example, green bonds and blended finance, in order to support landscape level restoration, regenerative agriculture, and sustainable value change. Coupled with African-led innovation and natural capital accounting, this will build a strong foundation for a resilient green economy. Achieving lasting change and building resilient economies require close cooperation between all actors, local communities, civil society organizations, governments, and donors. It is also essential to get the private sector on board with investments to close the widening funding gap. We know that landscape approaches only succeed with local leadership. Empowering indigenous communities, rural communities, women, and youth ensures that nature-based economies and inclusive, socially grounded, and job creating. Through our initiative for the transformation of agricultural and food systems, we empower indigenous peoples and local communities in securing their access and rights to lands and natural resources. Secure land rights enable sustainable resource management, strengthen environmental stewardship, and boost climate resilience. Our global program, Responsible Land Policy, has already secured land rights for 3.5 million people in 11 countries, with over 60% being women. In addition, BMZ co-founded the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative, AFR 100, uniting 34 African countries to restore 100 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. Moreover, we are supporting this effort through the AFR 100 support program, which is implemented by FAO. This way, we enhance funding and technical assistance for forest and smallholder producers, thereby fostering innovation in restoration-based value creation. Through the global program Forest for Future, we support tree planting, agroforestry, and community forest management. Thereby, we create green jobs, improve living conditions, and boost climate resilience. The joint session by GIZ and World Vision today will showcase experiences and strategies in scaling up farmer-managed natural regeneration using a newly developed e-learning module. This module is based on case studies and best practices from Kenya and Ethiopia, highlighting the role of communities, governments, and development partners. I think also that Germany can play a key role in scaling nature-based solutions by co-investing in landscape restoration, climate-smart agriculture, and ecosystem-based adaptation. Through integrated approaches, we can build regenerative economies and empower communities. We can position Africa as a global hub for nature-based innovation and climate-smart development. And just recently, our new minister highlighted that we stand at a point in time where Europe and Africa can be co-creators of a new paradigm grounded in respect, openness, and reciprocity, and embarked on a new shared era. Finally, I'm very happy that GLF gathers such a broad audience to discuss concrete experiences, innovative approaches, and shape a common understanding of the necessary transformations. I'm sure that these discussions will also inspire our own work at BMZ. So thank you so much. I wish you all the best and have fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
This new paradigm. Do you believe that? How many believe that? You don't appear too confident. How many truly, truly believe that and can cross their hearts and say they are going to be part of the action? How many do that? Good. Thank you very much. And as Dr. Eliane reminded us this morning, the value of natural capital. And that's something that many of us keep looking at and saying, indeed, we have what it takes. We have the youth, we have the natural capital, we have everything, and there is no excuse. And so it gives me such a great honor to present our second keynote, Sela Bogonko, who is truly passionate about one of the greatest assets in Africa, the youth. And Sela is going to give us a keynote on what it takes to set up a bold vision and to rewrite Africa's development narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, hands together for Sela.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're in the climate world, you've probably heard of these numbers. $100 billion promised in Copenhagen, but delivered 13 years later in 2022. $400 billion needed annually for loss and damage. To date, only 741 million has been pledged. For those trying to do the math, that's only 0.2%. In COP29 last year, Africa asked for $1 trillion to facilitate the continent's green transition. The response? $300 billion. Am I the only one seeing a pattern here? These numbers tell a story, not just of inadequate financing, but of a fundamental misunderstanding of Africa's relationship with the world. We have been positioned as supplicants, at the mercy of donor and political goodwill, when we should in fact be partners in investment opportunities. So what exactly is the problem? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Africa's development blueprint is not African. It's a worn-out photocopy of the Global North's playbook, complete with its triumph, yes, but also its deep and dangerous mistakes. We borrowed a model built on extractions, not regeneration. A model that worships GDP, but neglects ecosystems. A model that prioritizes speed over sustainability, and in doing so, has driven the planet to the brink. The worst part is that we have been made to believe that development means tall structures, cities buzzing with horns and concrete, not thriving wetlands, clean air, or food sovereignty. And that progress is measured by how fast we grow and not how well we live. We've inherited blueprints that don't fit our realities, plans that ignore our cultures, our climate, our capacities. You don't believe me? How many of us, and how many times have we as Africans been met with that jesting question of whether we live on trees or cohabit with animals? And instead of embracing the deep biodiversity those remarks are unknowingly pointing to, we've rushed to prove our civilization by showcasing glass towers, highways, and imported lifestyles. And in doing so, we've measured our worth by someone else's yardstick. Allow me to share 2 reflections on how we can achieve a new blueprint for Africa. First, we need a shift from aid to investment-centered development. Africa is home to $6.5 trillion in natural resources, a population that is about to reach 2.5 billion by 2050, and 60% of the world's renewable energy potential. This is not a charity case. This is a compelling investment case that the world cannot afford to ignore. But investments do not happen by default. They happen by design. To attract meaningful capital, we must move beyond the language of need and start showing up with investable opportunities. That means prioritizing or positioning our natural capital, meaning our sun, wind, forests, and people, not as vulnerabilities, but as competitive advantage. I was at TED Countdown this week, where a lady called Ilona Zabo from Brazil did a compelling talk about how Brazil is financing reforestation and regeneration of the Amazon by supporting sustainable economic activities in the forest. Li Zhang from Envision shared how his company has built the cheapest battery manufacturing plant in the world in Gobi Desert. Now, they achieved this price by using the free and abundant wind and sun energy found in the desert. Africa doesn't just have free wind and sun. It has the desert and the critical minerals just down the road. Secondly, we must center youth and innovation in economic policy. With the youngest population in the world, Africa must position our youth not as a burden, but as a competitive advantage. The youth bulge is real, and so is the opportunity. The World Bank estimates that 1/3 of the world's population and of the working population by 2075 will be African. To reap this demographic dividend, we must strategically deploy data-driven education models that prepare African youth to be high-value assets today and in the future. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, imagine this with me. At COP25 or at COP30 later this year, and at the Africa Climate Summit to be held in September this year, Africa shows up and steps on the global stage, not as a passive player, but as a bold, equal partner. Not merely asking for support, but offering solutions. Not following someone else's script, but setting the agenda. I believe we can do that. But what we do need is a new development blueprint. One that is bold, regenerative, and unapologetically African. I thank you.
I told you, ladies and gentlemen, what can someone say after that? What can someone truly, truly say after that? That we are unapologetically African and that we need to be at the table and that we need to provide those solutions, taking into account our demographic dividend. Thank you so much, Sela, for those very, very deep remarks that you have made. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Peter Minang, who is going to give us the overall conference framing today. Peter is joining us from Bonn. Peter, the time is yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Good morning, good afternoon. I'm very glad to be. I'm sorry I can't be with you physically in Nairobi, but hopefully we still have a discussion online. I'm glad to be here this morning. Thank you, GLF, for the opportunity to share with you some thoughts about how, the very interesting theme today of innovate, restore, prosper, through a nature-based economy. I think this is really a new pathway that the continent needs to take to be able to address the triple challenges that we have: poverty, climate change, ecosystems degradation. I think this is really the paradigm that helps us to sort of address all at the time. I think the bulk of the people sitting in the room are from the restoration community. So you're really talking about the restore. That's the language that a lot of us understand. I would like us to spend a bit more time around the innovative part and the restore part. So I'll frame my talk this morning around sort of 4 points. The first point is really about moving from a nature-based economy, simple concept, to one that looks at a nature, bio, secular, and green economy. And the bioeconomy is a very deliberate term, and green and secular are really very deliberate. Elian talked about the vast capital that we have. It's been documented, natural capital. But I think that remains only capital if we don't give it value. And I think that the most important part of the story that we need to generate is how we give value to our biomass through a bioeconomy approach, through a secular approach that renews our biomass, that helps keep that natural capital in the right state and not degrade it. And also green in the sense that we are looking at zero emissions. You're looking at nature positive approaches that are bringing more ecosystem services as opposed to degrading that. And I think that the current model that we operate in the restore community really is only capturing and valuing 10% of the biomass, between 6 and 10% of the biomass. And I'll give you some examples. If you look at the current model that we operate from a nature-based economy, it's largely around commodities, non-timber forest products, and which means you're looking at simple commodities from the forest, from shrublands, from trees, value chains like, coffee, cashew, macadamia, timber, other non-timber forest products. When you look at that combination in Africa right now, it's anything between 15 and 19% of GDP. But even though it's 15 and 19% of GDP, from our analysis, it's only capturing between 6 and 9% of the value of the biomass. And let me give you cashew nuts as an example. Cashew is the fastest growing tree on landscapes on the continent right now in Africa. But what you see is that despite all the effort that people are spending and time and investment, we are only capturing 9% of the value of the cashew nut. We only use the nut. We don't use the shells that are possibly good for briquettes, for solving the wood issues that we have. We don't use that in Asia. Some companies are now using it to making valuable brake parts for cars, which we don't necessarily do on the continent. We export everything raw. We don't use the apples that are good for medicinal purposes and for also some industrial food processes. We don't use some of the nuts for animal feed. And we also don't deploy a lot of the biomass for biofertilizers that the continent badly needs. So we are only capturing a very small part of that value in cashew, which is 9%. And the same applies for a lot of the other commodities that we are developing as we restore in the landscape. I mean, like wood-based construction is becoming big all around the world. Wood demand is skyrocketing. How are our restoration efforts making sure that we are even producing the wood that is required for our populations? I think this tells us that we need to think about value webs now and not value chains. So a chain is just one thing. A web looks at multiple products from the same. The second thing that I wanted to emphasize is, as we think restore, we need to think about innovating through biotechnology. and biopharmacy, because without biotechnology, connecting biotechnology to landscape restoration, we are not going to add value beyond the simple value chain that we have at the moment. And I think that that's important. So what Stella was talking about, what Dorothy was talking about, the questions one would ask is, how is FSD investing in biotechnology startups that are connected to restoration, for example? And for Stella, for example, how are private sector startups and small companies getting into these restoration value webs and trying to build value? I think that that's the direction we need to take. And my last point really is about having a conversation that is bigger than the restore community. We talk about, I think Paul made a very valuable point in his talk at the beginning, where he talked about integrating this into planning at the national level. If the Ministry of Finance is not in the room, how do they understand the need to invest in this transformative approach? I can challenge us in the room now in Nairobi or online, how many people are from government, from the Ministry of Planning, from the Ministry of Finance? Without that connection, we can't possibly move towards a nature-based bioeconomy or circular or green economy. And I think that it is important for us to begin to think about data that convinces investors, that convinces private sector to invest in this. Because if the Minister of Finance doesn't understand that a bioeconomy in Kenya can generate $56 billion from our estimates, something that is probably bigger and challenging tourism, the contribution of tourism to the economy, then they won't invest in it. And I think that these are the conversations we need to have. In the room now, for a bioeconomy discussion, we are supposed to have at least 30%, of government, 30% of us, the restore community, and about 30% of the private sector in the room. That's the kind of partnership that we will need. That's the kind of outreach that we will need to move this transformation forward. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Dr. Peter, I will not let you go before saying this to this audience. I listened to Dr. Peter challenge the G20 Bioeconomy Working Group this year in South Africa. And he gave a very compelling presentation, including things to do with the acacia and the value of the acacia tree. He spoke about the avocado tree. And one of the things that, he's not disappeared. I thought he had disappeared. I need him to hear this. One of the things that he said, he actually had this very bold statement and said, Africa's bioeconomy value that is retained in continent stands at less than 9%. And the room was shocked. And out of that, just as he has challenged us this morning, asking where is policy, where is government, where is the other, out of that presentation and out of the challenge that he gave, I want to say that bioeconomy working group is actually now taking on a bold vision and saying, what can we do to bring 50% value to be retained within the continent? And those are the sort of questions that we need to keep hearing, the sort of challenges that we need to keep listening to. But more importantly, the actions that each of us needs to take. So Peter, thank you so much for that very compelling, presentation and the challenge that you gave at that time, and the fact that you're still preaching that even as we are here this morning. I want us to move to Slido. Is the Slido link up? Is it up? Yes. I'd like to know we'd like to have a quick session to just get from your own words, what would an African-centered nature economy look like? Please just, no questions yet, but yes, the questions are there. In your own words, just quick words. What do you think an African-centered nature economy should look like? Having listened to Dr. Elian, having listened to Sela, having listened to Paul, and of course, having listened to Peter and your own reflections. Then I also want to remind you a second thing. The vision wall is out there. When you have time, please give us your thoughts on this particular aspect. A couple of responses, locally driven. One that is locally driven, yes. Women-led, good. Green. Sustainable. Inclusion and empowerment of young people. I like that. I think I saw something like to lead and not borrow. Did I see something like that? Scalable, community-based, intergenerational, right? That's deep. Fair wealth distribution, independent, sustainable timber cities. It would be good to hear about that, right? Future ready, Afro-centered and indigenous inclusion, empowering, prosperous, community-led, and the majority value kept here in our countries, similar to what Dr. Minang keeps speaking about. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to now move to the second session, which will be a panel discussion. And here we are going to cover from crisis to opportunity, Africa's nature economy as a development driver. And I'm going to welcome to the stage, a few are going to join us virtually. I think there's a pre-recorded video. Maxwell Gomera, Director, African Sustainable Finance Hub, who will be joining us via pre-recorded video. Lillian Masharia, Africa Capital Hub Director, the Investment Bank for Earth. There's an investment bank for Earth who will be joining us virtually. Yi Lee, co-founder, please come to the stage, and CEO, FarmWorks, a tech-driven leading agribusiness based in Kenya, who is here with us. And last but not least, Balbina Andrew, all the way from Tanzania, an indigenous community leader. So Peter, indigenous community is here. Executive Director of Nourish Africa and GLFX Mwanza Coordinator. Karibuni sana. And I'm going to start off with the pre-recorded video by Maxwell. Please take a listen. Thank you.
You know, we shouldn't be surprised about the state of the world today, because much of what we're seeing is a result of choices that we, present generations, and those who came before us made. Here is one. When I was a college student in Zimbabwe, I used to argue with my engineering friends about construction in Harare. Many people were building on wetlands. The engineers had a solution for it. Special foundation. It's an actual thing. Look it up. It's concrete designed to work against nature, not with it. And I kept wondering, why would we need special foundation in the first place? What is so special about building where you probably shouldn't be building? But the real issue wasn't the engineering. It was what we were losing. Wetlands are nature's engineers. They filter our water, they store it, they recharge underground aquifers and fill our lakes, like Lake Manyame, which supplies Harare today. When you build over them, boreholes dry up faster, water becomes harder and more expensive to treat. Ecosystems collapse quietly, and we all pay for it. Now, here in South Africa, we saw a better way. Through the biodiversity and landscape use project, we supported municipalities to integrate ecological infrastructure into development decisions. That's a fancy way of saying we helped build with nature, not over it. We created maps, governance tools, and planning systems to protect the wetlands, rivers, forests, and the very systems that keep water flowing and economies going. And the results are astounding. When nature is part of the plan, productivity goes up, climate risks go down, and communities thrive. This isn't just a conservation story. It's an economic strategy. It's a political choice. Africa's pathway to prosperity doesn't lie in pouring more concrete. It lies in restoring natural systems, that have sustained us for generations. We don't need more special foundations. We need stronger ones, rooted in nature, justice, and foresight. Sometimes I wish I had had a voice then. I wish I had been able to say to my colleagues, no, you are wrong. That is why we are proud to partner today with the Global Landscapes Forum, because resolving this isn't just about restoring land. It's about restoring dignity. It's about restoring the links between people, planet, and purpose. We wish the Global Landscape Forum every success as it inspires a generation to innovate, restore, and prosper.
Hands of applause. Hands of applause, please, for Maxwell. Thank you very much. Restoring dignity. And through this session today, we are going to see how each of our panelists is playing their role in restoring dignity and working towards this new economic paradigm. I want, Sharia? Could I have can you hear me well? Yes. Lillian Masharia, who's going to be joining us virtually. Lillian? Green.
Good morning.
Lillian, welcome.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. So, Lillian, the question that we have to you, as you reflect on the keynote addresses today, reflecting on Mr. Gomera's video, reflecting on the keynotes this morning, what models of nature-based enterprises have you come across, and which ones are actually delivering socio-ecological returns? And more importantly, then how can we scale them, even as you speak about what you do?
Very many thanks. And good morning, everybody, and friends and stewards of African Landscape. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and happy to respond to that question, which is very rich in many ways. First and foremost, I think we just want to acknowledge and echo what the previous speakers have talked about the real importance of having, really first of all, acknowledging that nature is not just our heritage, but it's our economy. And we are super rich in Africa, both in terms of the resources we have, whether it's natural, in terms of forest, water, and soil, and that which are currently under threat. And we therefore need to really think about how we can safeguard this and work with them to also really extract the value that's coming out of it. So I'll start a little bit by talking about what we do and then bring in how which other models are working. But I would just first of all say at the Africa Capital Hub, which is a relatively young initiative, we believe that scaling nature-based enterprises is not just about replicating ready-made solutions. I think previous speakers have talked about the need to ground whatever we do in our local contexts, and also the importance of us driving those changes and the investment itself, and actually also making a case for making our nature an asset that is investable in, and that we can actually extract value and be able to drive our own development in a sustainable way. So from the Africa Capital Hub, we actually believe in building our financing models in a manner that is locally grounded and that is also structurally supported so that we're able to deliver the maximum impact. And then we bring in capital that then is aligned with those ambitions. And what does this look like? For us, what we are currently doing is we're working with governments. I think there was a question about having different stakeholders. Why is the government coming in? It cannot just be civil society on its own or private sector on its own. We have to have a nexus of all the parties at the table, and government being a key player in this. So you're working with governments to come up with an investment-ready pipeline in different areas, including clean cooking, regenerative agriculture, and health-based ecosystems. And in our engagements with these governments, we don't come and just talk about money and and figures. We are actually engaging not just with government ministries, and we are looking at different ministries because a lot of the things we deal with are multifaceted. And we're also working with local communities, with the civil society, as well as with private sector. So what we do is we blend our financing structures such that we are layering government funding with donor financing and private capital, but also community contributions. As we say, communities should not be seen as just recipients. They should also be owners and drivers of their own, and they also have something to contribute. And then we come up with instruments that then are grounded in those local realities and aligned with the ambitions of the communities. And you asked me where is this working? We have, for instance, an example of, not with the Africa Capital Hub, but elsewhere. We have the EcoPlanet Bamboo Initiative, which is in Nicaragua and Ghana, which has really pioneered a remarkable model where they have been able to transform over 37,000 acres of degraded land into a thriving bamboo plantations. And these plantations have not just restored landscapes, but they've also generated over 1,200 jobs, long-term ones, and sequestered serious 5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. And that's over the project life cycle. They've also provided certifiable raw materials that replaced illegal logging and supported new industries in the process. And then this has also been made possible by having investors who've come along because they've seen that this initiative was built on economic in environmental integrity, social equity, and financial viability. So I think this is just a demonstration that these are not mutually exclusive. So, for us, what we believe in ACH is really scaling with integrity, if you're talking about the issue of scale. And here we are looking at not just replicating, as we said, models blindly, but it's also looking at how we can adapt them to the local context with a shared structure, but it's also differentiated for the realities that we're facing. We believe we leverage 4 levels in our areas in the way we approach our financing. One, we're looking at a neutral capital intermediation, where we are matching capital with the community priorities. And we look at de-risking investments and facilitated structured engagement with other different capital providers. And for us, we are not focused on one or the other. We look at philanthropy's role, we look at government's role, we look at what the DFIs and bilateral funders bring to the table. And you see how can we bring all these resources together to support the community priorities. The other thing is you also leverage on local knowledge and also look at how we can leverage also with global practices so that it's adapted for the realities that we face in. And in this case, we also bring in communities on the table. And that's what, for example, we are doing. I'm currently talking from Malawi because we've just had a similar discussion with Malawi around ending child marriages. The other thing we look at is the thematic and transactional convergence. And here we are looking at aligning and focusing on high impact themes that are likely to transform and have an impact. That includes regenerative agriculture. And we're looking at aligning those themes with capital flows so that we ensure they can be scaled up, but they also have local ownership. We're not scaling up things that are not relevant to the communities that we're trying to serve. And finally, I think there's an issue about data and technology. We are looking at how we can, whatever we do is informed by data, but also we make sure that we include in our design process of money tracking, basing our progress on data, so that first and foremost, we can check whether we are delivering, we instill confidence, and also we can also monitor the outcomes that you're coming up with. So I think just to summarize, I would say that for us, we don't just fund awareness or projects. We're looking at community-aligned interventions, and that these are shaped by the local realities, even though we are leveraging and bringing to the fold a lot of other players to the table. And I think there's a question about what COP30 would look like. I think it's really looking at, are we going to wait for the big capital to find us, or are we going to design our own nature? And I think that's what Africa Capital Hub tries to do, working with governments to build that capacity to structure and drive the kind of support we need so that it is responding to our local communities. We'll try to make sure that the money we fundraise is put in the right places, the right hands, and also in the right manner to deliver solutions. So we are actually reimagining development and looking at, one regenerative enterprise or one initiative at a time. Thank you, and happy to engage in further questions.
Yes, so thank you very much. Please clap for Lillian. And, Lillian, you've talked about 4 key aspects. You talked about local knowledge. You talked about transactional convergence. You talked about data. And you talked about intermediation. And later on, we're going to ask you a question on how to reach you in case we want to get the support that you have available. You also really talked about regenerative agriculture. And my next question is to Yiling of FarmWorks. But before I ask you the question, because I have the mic, I want to give a shout out to World Vision. They are here in the room, right? Yeah? For those who know me, and I won't say why, but World Vision, we are watching what you're doing and very proud of you with your, you call it FMNR, right? Farmer managed natural regeneration. Good. And now it takes us to Yi. We want to understand, is what Lillian was talking about real? Are there real and tangible examples that we can talk about from within the continent? What are the benefits? And specifically then, what does FarmWorks do?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So I'm E, CEO and co-founder of FarmWorks. We're a Kenya-based agribusiness that's today working with a few thousand smallholder farmers to provide them with market access. Specifically, we buy a lot of tomatoes, onions, potatoes, avocados from our farmers and make sure they have the market access. We also give them trainings on climate resilient agricultural practices. We also sometimes, depends on their needs, provide financing for inputs, equipment, etc. But what we are is we're a wholesaler of vegetables. So after I buy from the farmers, we're then distributing the produce across the country to the formal and informal markets. So in terms of formal markets, for example, if you shop at Naivas or Quick Mart or Zucchini or any of the grocery store chains, those are our customers. But then we understand in Kenya, most of the fresh produce is actually sold in the informal markets by hundreds and thousands of mamambogas. So that's actually our main customer. Today, more than 12,000 mamambogas are our customers, relying on us to deliver to them their daily supplies of the nyanyas and vitungu to be sold for the day. So that's the role that we're playing. What we're trying to do is to build a more resilient and consistent supply chain. So the farmers know if they work with us, they always have a place to sell their produce. And the mamas also know if they work with us, they no longer need to be struggling to get their produce. They know from us, it's good quality tomatoes, it's traceable, and it's affordable at a reasonable price. That's what we're trying to build. Now, to go back to some of the points I heard earlier from our keynote speaker as well as panelists, a few things I want to emphasize. Number one thing is, indeed, I believe what we need in our market is not necessarily more aid or free training for the farmers. It's actually economically viable businesses. I was also at TED Kantang this week and gave a talk. So the topic of my talk is why economic sustainability is the foundation to build real climate sustainability. In our experience, when we give the farmers trainings, but without buying their produce, it was never very effective because you can train them all you want with organic, regenerative practices, but in the end, the farmer has to answer the question, who is going to buy my produce? That's when we changed our approach. I said, let me actually build this distribution channel first so I can buy from you. Then you're actually more likely to have the income to even invest in your own farms. And we're seeing that method is working better than training only. And that's why we're very much focused on the market offtake part of the business. The second thing, which also was mentioned, is young people. We are a business where more than 80% of our employees is under the age of 30. Supposedly, young people are not interested in agriculture. I don't think that is true. In fact, young people in Kenya, or Kenyans in general, love farming and agriculture. But what they love even more is to have a decent job and steady income. So if you give them that, young people will actually jump into agriculture. So I'm very proud to say that we're a business in agriculture made of and by young talent. And I think we're able to see more and more businesses like ours on the continent as well.
Thank you very much. It is a surprise because many discussions are saying and many reports have been saying that the youth are not interested in farming anymore. And so it means there is hope. And so I want to shift to you, Balbina kutoka Mwanza. And I want to ask you, what are the policy shifts needed both nationally and locally to actually make this work, especially when you look at rights of indigenous people?
Asante sana. One Saturday night, I was having a conversation, a serious conversation with one of my elder in the community. And I was asking him this question, like I was telling him our struggle as a young people and women in the community. And I was telling him, especially in the economic struggle. And that elder smiled to me and said, there is no nobility in struggle. And he said in Swahili, mkitaka kufanikiwa wekezeni kwenye ardhi. And that means if you wanna have a strong economy, you need to invest in landscape, you need to invest in nature. As a restoration practitioner and run light advocate, have seen this every day, have seen the struggle, have seen the crisis, have seen women in my community who are double marginalized to own the landscape, but have seen the opportunities as well. Have seen women owning agro businesses. I've seen young people owning nurseries businesses, and I've seen community changes. And as a GLF working closely with Global Landscape Forum GLF, I really appreciate GLF for trusting us, trusting our local community, and supporting us with our indigenous knowledges, but also putting us on the map toward Africans' nature economy. You said well about the role of policies and governance together with land rights. With all struggles and opportunity we have, but still we need a shift, especially to secure community land rights. We cannot economize the thing we don't own. And of course, guarantee tree tenures. Women and youth in my community have to benefit from the tree they are planted. And of course, this kind of thing that is really painful right now on climate and biodiversity finance is really exploiting us. So please, African leaders, don't sign those carbon credit thing without making us in the room, because it is our land. We own it, it's our thing, and it is our capital. So we need to be engaged and we need to be involved. Thank you.
We need to be engaged and we need to be involved. How deep and how true that is. I want to move back to Lillian. You're still with us, I hope. Lillian, can we get to the screen? Good, we can see you. And Lillian, I promised to ask you this question. If you're to speak to the audience here and they want to access or access financing, what are some of the barriers that you see? And more specifically, how can you, as the Investment Bank for Earth, support in this process? Where do they start? How do they reach you? And what do you need from them?
Thank you very much. I think this is a great opportunity to actually a little bit explain a bit more about Bankers Without Boundaries and also where ACH comes in. So just a little bit, Bankers Without Boundaries is an institution that's not for profit, but set up with former investment bankers who have sort of retired from their careers and have decided to dedicate their time and effort towards supporting developing countries in terms of mobilizing capital. And what they bring on board is their structural expertise, their networks of capital providers, both from philanthropies, from capital markets, but also leveraging also on others who understand development finance to look at how can we support African governments, for instance, in this case, to help structure financing and deals that deliver maximum impact, but also able to leverage the right type of capital for their needs and priorities. And what do we mean by that? We know right now we're talking about declining flows, high debt in governments, but then against a backdrop of ever-growing needs. So how do we maximize that and make sure that you're able to support our governments deliver maximum impact? So our entry point in the way we work is through governments, because you're trying to look at the governments as the key convener, right? And therefore, they're the ones who are driving the development agenda, but we want them to be able to leverage the capital and use it in the most efficient and effective way. So we work with the ministries, maybe the ministries of finance, which are critical because they're the ones involved in planning. And then we look at how they can leverage the different types of capital to make sure it's maximum. Because before you'd probably get grants and spend it out as grants, but you could perhaps use it in a more intelligent way that delivers most impact. So that's how we work. If anybody wants to work with us, I think mainly you could reach out to us and maybe you can look at where we are currently in discussion with government and see are there opportunities where your participation or your issues are currently being addressed, and then we can look at how maybe we can inform you on where what the opportunities look like and how you can participate in that. Maybe I will share. I don't know how I will share my email and contact points, but I could send that on the group for sharing with the participants after this. But we are very excited to actually look and get as many partners on board as possible.
Good. Thank you very much, Lillian. I want to shift to E, not E, E. And I want to understand, the audience would like to understand AI, the role of remote sensing, these camera traps that we hear about and all these things. How does that work and how do you, deploy that in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how many of people in the room now have at least one AI app you've downloaded on your phone? Right? Almost everybody? What? You haven't? Wow. So we're seeing that this AI adoption, right, is not really driven necessarily by us as organization, but even just our farmer or customers. You'd think, oh, maybe the farmers or the mamas are not so familiar with technology, but they've also downloaded, right? Because these apps have really made a wave. And like people understand now, you can even not use Google and ask your questions, right, to these applications. So I think there are a few layers to the question of answering how AI is affecting our life and the farmer's life. One layer is, as a business, how are we almost deploying enterprise AI solutions to make our business more resilient and stronger? Then the second question is, what type of AI solutions can we then provide for our customers and farmers to make their business also stronger? And I do think there is an order of step 1 and step 2. So currently we're still in the step 1 of deploying internally some AI solutions to figure out how can we more effectively build our supply chain. So for example, we have to deliver to many different markets every day. And there is a pretty complicated logistics routing plan that we have to come up with. And before, it's my logistics manager coming up with the routing. But now with AI, we're able to do a bit better routing planning using the data of traffic and the volume to different locations, etc., to come up with a better routine that can allow us to then lower the cost of distribution, which in Africa, if you do distribution, logistics cost is like such a huge cost for us due to a variety of reasons. So that's a big plus for us. We are also using AI to come up with the right pricing. You know, if you shop in the wholesale market, you know that tomato price is not the same every day. If you're in Marikiti, it's not even the same in the morning versus in the afternoon. So for us, we really have to understand how do we price our tomatoes, and now we're using AI to build some of those algorithms that can allow us to price better for our customers and farmers. In terms of what we plan to build in the next stage for our farmers and customers, we're hoping that with all of our digital touch points with our farmers, we're able to provide them, for example, right now they have to call us for agronomists to visit them and then to maybe give some advice. But then we only have 1 or 2 agronomists in the company, so that's more limited. But with AI, maybe we can scale that with them being able to upload a picture and for the AI to diagnose maybe this is an issue. Similarly, for soil testing, it's very expensive to do a soil test right now in the country. Most smallholder farmers cannot really afford it. But what we could potentially be building is now we can do easier soil testing with a small sample kit, and then AI can diagnose it. And typically the translation of the report is always in English, but maybe we can even translate using AI to Kiswahili, to Kikuyu, and all the other languages, so our farmers are able to understand better. So I think the future is very bright if we're able to use the technology in the correct way.
And now that you speak about pricing, I want to go back to Balbina. You talked very passionately about the communities and how do we shift power back to the youth, back to the indigenous people, back to the communities who are literally stewards of the natural capital that we enjoy quite freely.
Oh, thank you, Lillian. Doloth, I'm sorry. Yes, I was really keenly listening to you, and as a person working closely with indigenous community and local ones, we really need those scientific AIs as well on our restoration effort toward nature economy of Africa. This is what we need to shift the power to youth and women. And we must fund local initiative, basically, not as beneficiaries, but as the one who can lead the restorations in our communities. And of course, we need to protect our indigenous knowledges. We welcome this scientific one on the board, but has to be the part of us, but never replace our knowledges. And of course, we need the shift to place power of youth and elders in decision making. That is all we need. Yes.
Okay, so involve them in decision making. I want to ask the technical team if you could go back to the screen on Slido. We want to understand what your reflections are when having listened to this particular panel. And as you put the question on the screen, I want to ask the panelists just one last final thought in 1 minute, your key reflections. What would you want your audience to remember today in a minute? Let's start with E, and then Balbina, and then Lillian.
Great. I think one of the key things I want everyone to know is it is possible to build commercially viable agribusinesses. That is very important. I think there has been so much talk there is so much aid needed, as if the farmers and the business are naturally not capable of making a profit. But the reality is we have so much resources, so much talent, so many young people willing to work in this. We want to prove that this is actually a good job, and it's a good sector, and it's a profitable one. Because in the end, people are also driven by the basic economics. And we want to make sure that it's an important part of our conversation, and there are people working on delivering this dream.
Toward the African niche economy, I want us to remember to invest on our identity and to invest on our landscape. That is where we'll have a strong, unshakable African in nature economy. And that is all we need right now.
That's all we need. invest in our identity and our landscape. Lillian? Is Lillian still on the screen? Yes, we can see you.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think the main thing, I'll look at it from three perspectives. One is local ownership and leadership is key in whatever we do. We must drive our own development. And that then means that if you're very clear what you're looking for and what you're trying to get to, that becomes a fundamental issue. And then the next thing is we need to look at drawing in collaborators that are aligned with what we're trying to do, so that we are not always trying to chase after the next shiny object, but you're kind of driving what the shiny object looks like. So it's really looking at driving and bringing collaboration that are aligned and maybe or forcing that alignment because we are clear about our development. And of course, once we get those collaborators, it's also the really importance of having the appropriate structures that maximize the limited resources that we have and that deliver the maximum impact that we are looking for in a manner that is sustainable and cognizant of the local realities. And this is possible, as we've seen in our work in Africa Capital Hub. So I'll just say, let's own our development. Let's bring on board our collaborators that are aligned, or let's force that alignment, but then also then come up with structuring, something that ensures we can deliver that. And we also have accountability to show what we are delivering and how we're doing that. Thank you.
Great. Let's own our development. Are there any comments that we have on the screen on Slido? Your reflections on this? Although I'm getting an indicator that we are really short of time. But I just want to thank our panelists this morning. What key insight did this conversation spark for you? A seed you're taking that might grow roots beyond this space. Someone says we need to believe in ourselves and have a mindset shift. Someone says we need to define development. If it's destructive to nature, then it's not. I missed that. But if it's destructive to nature, then it's not development. Speak the language of the people. Speak the language of the people. And that's why you talked about AI and translation. The work is in bringing the moving parts together. Local ownership is key. And there was a question, how do we entrench ethics as we continue to drive this particular agenda? And so, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say that I personally am truly challenged by what I've had today. When I reflect on Gomera's presentation, where he said, let's build with nature, let's not build over it. And he talked about nature as being a part of the plan, and nature has to be part of the plan. And from the panelists on the stage today, that we can actually build commercially viable agribusinesses, and that we need to invest in our identity. We need to drive our own development, and that we actually need finance, as Lillian has indicated to us very well this morning. And this finance needs to be both philanthropic, public, and private capital. I just want to finish off with a speech that I had during the Blue Economy Finance Forum that was held last week. And the Costa Rica president, Rodrigo Chavez, came to the stage and spoke so passionately. But the line that I will never forget, he said, "Vision without action is just hallucination." And when you think about it, we have said very many things. We are talking about Africa and the natural capital and the youth and the demographic dividend and agribusinesses and finance. But as long as there's no action, we are all hallucinating, as I've had the AI models hallucinate, right? So the challenge is upon us that we have to act on what we have had today. We have to come to the table, because again, if you're not on the table, you're not at the table, you're actually on the menu. Thank you very much, and have a beautiful rest of the day. Bye.
And if you are on the menu, you are hallucinating. Thank you so much. So thank you so much to our amazing speakers in this opening plenary. And now that that is done, they've painted for us, the big picture for the urgency of new development model for Africa and the opportunities, that exist to realize this through, nature economy. So we ought to,